Good morning. I'm reverberating nicely this morning. Welcome, all of you, to First Church in Boston Unitarian Universalist. It's good to see so many of you here in person, and it's good to know that there are uncounted others watching us on YouTube. So welcome to all of you, whether in the flesh or remotely. I am Peter Bonos, a member of the Standing Committee of First Church. Barbara, the chair of the committee, and I have been taking turns this summer serving as coordinators for the Sunday service. And as Barbara is, in fact, preaching today, it had to be my turn to coordinate, so you're stuck with me. Again, a hearty welcome to all of you. If you are new, we love having newcomers. Do I see any really unfamiliar faces? One that I don't know really yet. If you'd like to know more about no, that's a familiar one. If you'd like to know more about this congregation or Unitarian Universalism in general, stick around after the service for coffee hour, and we like to talk. Just flag any one of us and share whatever you like and ask whatever you like. Or if you're too far away to come to coffee hour, visit our website or call the church office and arrange a tour, who knows. We call it coffee hour, but in the summer, most people go for the lemonade or the iced tea or something like that. There's always a small amount of real coffee available for those who really want it. Now, I would like to editorialize for a moment. We have spoken many times in recent years from this pulpit, among ourselves, in the media at large, about the growing divisiveness, the polarization facing this country. I am glad to see we have not yet gone so far that we cannot unite to agree that firing a gun at a former president of the United States and a credible candidate for that office, regardless of party, is a direct attack on our democracy, on all of us as a country. We should be glad that former President Trump seems to have come through the episode without any serious damage. We can all regret that some bystanders, as far as I know, were killed in the episode. We can all hope that the professionals investigating the matter get to the bottom of what actually happened, how it happened, and what can be done to make it less likely in the future. Thank you. Now for my script. Another deplorable event many of you have already heard of. On the 4th of July this year, the Unitarian Universalist Meeting House in Kingston, Massachusetts, that's down near Plymouth, was seriously vandalized. The Black Lives Matter and Pride banners were burned, set fire to. Things were broken, total damage, some priceless items that probably are irreplaceable antiques were destroyed. Total damage, as from what I've heard, has been estimated in the tens of thousands of dollars. Today's plate collection and next week's will be devoted to the Kingston Church and its work of repair. So give generously, as always, to the extent of your ability. Finally, a lighter note. About a week and a half from now, on Wednesday the 24th, the Landmarks Orchestra, who are a brilliant outfit, they perform frequently at the Hatch Bandshell in summer. They will be doing a concert of music by Gershwin, George Gershwin, and John Williams, and a group of us will be meeting at the church at 6:30 to walk over to the concert together. Feel free to bring blankets, seating, folding chairs, snacks, whatever you like. Join us and have a good time. And I think Fern has something to say.
As your membership chair, this is also a wonderful event for people that you might know that are interested in the church. I promise we're not creating, but to just be with us and enjoy us.
Thank you, Fern. And I think that's all I'm supposed to say, perhaps a bit more than I was supposed to say. So let our worship begin.
Good morning. All right. Good morning. I would like to open our service by recognizing how fortunate we are as a congregation in our access to the arts. To be together today, as Peter said, on a day that is not an easy one, to be together in a space with two works created by Boston artists for this chapel, to be offered musical selections that also bring us poetry, one of them composed by a member of our congregation, to have come together to consider the many ways that the arts speak to us and support us in our lives, in times of joy and in times of struggle. So if you will rise now as you are able and join me in the First Church affirmation as we light our chalice. Love is the spirit of the church, and service is law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. So if you want to take a couple of moments now to greet one another, as we are here together. We will now join in our opening hymn, so remain standing, for hymn number 148, Let Freedom Span Both East and West.
Freedom span both east and west, and love
And now if you'll join me in responsive reading number 567. That's 567, To Be of Use, by Marge Percy. And if you're new and don't know the drill, I will be, the lines in italics are for you to read, but I will be repeating them in a lower voice with you. I will be saying them along with you in a low voice so that our remote audience will pick it up from the mic. So thank you. 567. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who stand in the line and haul in their places, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing well done is doing well, has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real.
She died. This was the way she died. And when her breath was done, took up her simple wardrobe and started for the sun. She died. This was the way she died. And when her breath was done, took up her simple wardrobe and started for the sun. The little figure at the gate, the angels must have smiled, since I could never find her. Here on the mortal side.
Thank you. was so beautiful. And I think that says, all the things we could say about what art and music and poetry do for us. We come now to the moment in our service of sharing joys and concerns that we are feeling this morning. When anyone who would like may come forward and choose a pebble from the bowl, introduce yourself and tell us what you would like to share, and then drop it into the vessel of water. So is there anyone who would like to say something this morning? Bob.
Good morning. So this morning I wanted to really celebrate two people who are no longer in my life, but are in my heart. So today would have been my dad's 89th birthday, and July 7th, 1993 was the day my first partner, Ken Orton, died. And so those are two people that have been in my memory for a lot this past week. And so I just put this pebble in the container to memorialize them and to know that they're not forgotten.
Anyone else?
My friend, former fellow bell ringer at Christ Church, Cambridge, Madeline Armstrong, who, after retirement, moved into a place where she met and became friends with our retired former members, Bob and Annie Schmaltz, whom some of you will remember. Madeline, a couple of weeks ago, unexpectedly turned out to have a malignant brain tumor and is going into hospice for palliative care. So a pebble of concern for Madeline, a wonderful person, and for her spectacularly beautiful cat, Frederick, who will be needing a new home. Thank you.
Okay, Fern.
Sometimes I could be a little schmaltzy. I want you to know on Sundays, I walk in here and my gift is seeing all your faces, and that's for more than a quarter of a century. So I want to thank you for being part of my family. And my concerns are, during this hot weather, to check in, I think, with some of our congregants and just see how they are, or invite them for some air conditioning and tea. I think that's a good idea. So I didn't do both my, you can't train me. All right, well, joy and my concern. There.
Right. So I'll place one more stone for the joys and concerns that we hold in our hearts unspoken. As Peter mentioned, this is a disturbing day in a very difficult time for our country and for all the world. And I want us all to just take a deep breath and take a moment of silence, perhaps to reflect on our connection as a community, that we are able to come together at moments like this and at all moments with our thoughts and our questions to draw wisdom and consolation from each other, and to go forth into the world strengthened for the challenges that we face. So let us join in a moment of silence. Amen. We come now to the moment of our offertory. And this week, as Peter said, our offering will go to the fund for repair of the UU Church in Kingston. Our sermon reading is from the book All the Beauty in the World, which is a perspective on the Metropolitan Museum of Art written by Patrick Bringley, who was a guard there from 2008 to 2018, from his mid-20s to his mid-30s. This passage describes an encounter with an early Greek statue of a nude youth, a type of statue called a kouros. It's not a lifelike athlete like the discus thrower and the ones that come later. It's still archaic, rather stiff and formal, but signaling toward that naturalism. And I can show you how to Google an image later. Patrick Bringley writes, "Standing up tall, I draw as close as I can to the nude Greek, who is himself standing with one foot in front of the other, in the manner of an Egyptian pharaoh. But this young man is not a pharaoh, not a king, and he wasn't carved for any magical purpose, as much of the art before him had been. The kouros was a grave marker, carved simply to say this was a mortal man, before it was placed atop this particular man's remains. Oddly, I feel a spark of pride, as I believe many people do while viewing the kouros. Something tells us we ourselves are the subject of this uniquely approachable masterpiece. There is something touchingly plain and even awkward about the statue, one of the first freestanding nudes ever attempted. Stylistically, it has an adolescent look, indicating an artist who hadn't perfected his formulas, who was feeling his way through, discovering how to manifest a fresh thought. The kouros seems alive to the audacity of the undertaking, shaping a vital mortal form out of cold, hard stone. Its carver achieved a figure that is godlike in its beauty, and at the same time, callow, naked, vulnerable. As I stand in front of the statue, I find it easy to grasp that two things are true: that the Kouros was carved a very long time ago, and also that it was carved not so long ago by an artist with hands like mine. On the time scale of the marble the Kouros was shaped from, ancient Athens is a heartbeat away. We're now going to sing the sermon hymn 134, and I have to say one of the pleasures and challenges of this service was choosing hymns, which is something I have never done. I read the 334. This one is a little unfamiliar, so Bob is going to play it through once, and then we'll sing it. Thank you. Those words are by W.H. Auden, so that's another poet heard from. The book I just read from, All the Beauty in the World, was published about a year ago, and ever since, museum people have been telling me that I had to read it. And I finally got around to it about 3 weeks ago, after I had chosen this sermon topic, and I had no idea that it would offer me something to add to the sermon. I only knew that it presented the world of the Metropolitan Museum as seen by a guard. But I discovered that Patrick Bringley wrote it for some of the same reasons that I chose the topic of my sermon. Bringley was brought up in an art-loving family in Chicago. He visited the Art Institute. He remembers visiting the Met for the first time when he was 11 years old, pulling his family from one gallery to the next because he was afraid he was going to miss something. He had to see it all. He went to college in New York and continued to visit the Met, first as an English major who took a few art history courses, and then during the first years of his entry-level job at the New Yorker. But then his older brother developed cancer, and for 2.5 years, the family's life revolved around his brother's apartment and his hospital rooms until he passed away. His death was devastating to Patrick. His job at the New Yorker and its prospects felt pointless. He writes at the beginning of All the Beauty in the World, when in June of 2008, Tom died, I applied for the most straightforward job I could think of in the most beautiful place I knew. This time, I arrive at the Met with no thought of moving forward. My heart is full, my heart is breaking, and I badly want to stand still a while. He stayed for 10 years. And the book covers many of the things I expected, the interactions with visitors, from the trivial to the absurd to the profound, the community of guards from all kinds of backgrounds and all parts of the world, reflections on many works of art, and I enjoyed all of it. But I was particularly struck with paragraphs like the passage I just read that capture what I want to talk about today: the conversations that individual works of art can trigger in our minds with ourselves or with others. The very immediate human connection, often across centuries, that is encoded in these works, and that we can sometimes lose track of when we focus on formal beauty or artistic skill, inventive genius, and all the things that I loved in my years at the MFA. In some ways, my sermon is a companion to Kathy Collins' sermon a month ago. I was very intrigued to discover that we had both chosen to talk about experiences when the art we value and savor connected with what Kathy called the social justice aspect of life. Kathy's story was about taking music into the space of the prison, to those confined there. Mine is about bringing first-year medical residents interned at Brigham and Women's Hospital to the space of the Art Museum for respite and renewal and important conversations. The arts and humanities have become a more frequent aspect of medical education over the past 25 to 30 years. In the case of the visual arts, what was recognized first was their value in the development of what's sometimes called visual literacy. Studies showed that medical students who participated in even 3 or 4 learning to look sessions at an art museum achieved a measurable increase. And Helen could tell you measurable is really important in the medical world. They achieved a measurable increase in their ability to recognize visual cues and patterns in medical contexts. And you can imagine the value of that in everything from dermatology to radiology to surgery to primary care. So in the education department at the MFA, where I worked, we were approached around the year 2000 by a trio of Harvard medical students and 2 of their professors who wanted to explore how we might collaborate on this sort of training. And the result was a course that those professors and students taught with 2 of my most perceptive and skillful colleagues. And I believe it is still offered. It was offered by them for many years. I believe it's still offered at Harvard Medical School, although they have moved on. It was called Training the Eye, the Visual Art of Diagnosis. It's much easier for medical students to give time to that sort of engagement with the arts than it is for active doctors and other medical practitioners. But we really wanted to serve that community in the hospitals as well. Part of it was just that we were neighbors. The MFA and the medical area are right next to each other. They didn't have to come far. It seemed that we must be able to be a resource in some way. And through various contacts and discussions, around 2010, we were invited to develop a one-night workshop to be incorporated into what Brigham and Women's called the humanistic curriculum. And this is an aspect of their first-year training in which groups of 12 to 15 interns meet once a month with a mentor who may be a medical school professor, a therapist, a senior physician. And they meet to talk about the human dimensions of being a physician. They talk about difficult patients, about burnout, about the importance of empathy and the importance of the limits of empathy. And this is an area in which the various arts and humanities were increasingly valued. And sometimes these discussions would begin with a poem or a short story. I was thinking the Dickinson poem, I could imagine being part of one of those discussions. So we planned the MFA evening as a session that would give the interns varied ways of relating to each other and of reflecting on themselves. in discussions in which many right answers were possible, that opened themselves to a variety of points. And we always began by saying we were welcoming them for the evening to relax, to be in a space where it was very unlikely that their medical skills would be needed, and where we would be having discussions in which no one's life was at stake. The workshop had several sections to keep sort of changing pace, engaging with works of art in different ways, sometimes as a large group and smaller groups. We would usually begin with all of them together, 12, 16 interns, in a discussion of a single figurative painting, one that was very open to interpretation. Sometimes we used the big Gauguin, which I'm sure many of you know. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? I remember one time using Copley's Watson and the Shark, but we wouldn't tell them the titles. We didn't mention the artist's name. These discussions focused really on what they saw. They always began with the question, what's going on in this painting? And as they began to offer observations and suggestions and theories, the key question in responding was, what do you see that makes you say that? So this technique, with which this discussion was facilitated, was one that emphasized shared observation and deduction rather than factual information or art historical knowledge. It certainly developed skills in looking, but it also strengthened listening skills, the skill of building on the observations of others, remaining open to alternative explanations. If somebody said, no, I don't think that represents, youth, because look, her hair is white. And this is the technique that was the core strategy in the Harvard Medical School course that I mentioned. One of the reasons our partner, Dr. Joel Katz, when he would give the 10 reasons the arts are important to medical training, one of my favorites was when he told us that tolerance for ambiguity had been specifically identified as a goal of medical training. That if you can resist finding an answer fast, if you can remain open to alternative explanations, look for more data, listen to what somebody else is noticing, you are ultimately a more successful diagnostician. And art supports that kind of discussion. Another exercise was one that asked them to make personal meaning from an ambiguous work of art. We would divide them into groups of 3 or 4 and assign each group to a contemporary sculpture to consider that sculpture as a metaphor for their lives at that moment. So if you imagine a group assigned to our stained glass window, one group might say that their experiences at the hospital felt very fragmented. Some of them were small, some of them were large and glowing, and that they very seldom were able to step back far enough to see a larger pattern. Or another group might say that the red and yellow areas felt like all of the energy and pressure and urgency at the hospital, and the blue spaces were their moments of rest squeezed in around the edges. I'm just riffing here, but you get the idea. In these exercises, we chose the works of art that were going to be the focus for their capacity to support many interpretations. In the case of this exercise, maybe to open the opportunity for interns to say things they might not otherwise have expressed. If you're using metaphorical language, to say that many times you have no idea what you're doing, that's a little more sayable than it might be just straight. But whatever the content of the conversation was, it would come from them. We were not choosing works on the basis of subject matter, on the basis of the connection of the artist's intent to medical issues. So we had our plan for the evening constructed on that basis. And then the young physician who would be our partner in leading these discussions, who was in charge of the humanistic curriculum, made a very specific content-based request. She said, do you have a work of art that could be the basis for a conversation about death? And she told us that she asked for that because death was such a constant presence in that first year of internship. because those interns were the ones who were in the hospital all the time. And hospitals are where we go at the end of life. So these very new, usually very young doctors are often the ones caring for dying patients, talking with their families, pronouncing patients dead. Depending on your specialty, she said, you may never again engage as much with death as you do in that first year. And in the pace of the hospital, there was seldom time to process what had happened. So we thought a little, but we almost immediately decided on the Etruscan sarcophagus. That is illustrated in your order of service if you haven't found it yet. It's on the next to the last page, so you might want to take that out. Thursday evenings are a quiet time at the MFA, and the Etruscan Gallery was the quietest space of all. Unfortunately, it is currently closed for relocation. You can't go right over to visit the sarcophagus. But at that time, it was the farthest corner of the lower level of the ancient art galleries. It was comparatively dimly lit, and by that time in the evening, it was dark outside the windows onto Huntington Avenue. So when we found our way there, it felt very far away from everything else. And following all the earlier lively discussions in the brightly lit galleries of the varied contemporary art, it felt that we had come to a secluded place for a different kind of conversation, and that we had all the time we needed. So we would gather around the sarcophagus, gazing down at it like any gallery talk group, but that also put us in the position of a group of doctors and students gathered around a patient's bed. So just as Patrick Bringley speaks of stepping right up to the Kouros, kind of getting, we were sharing the same space with this older couple together in their bed. I would briefly introduce the sarcophagus, that it was made almost 2,000 years ago for a married couple to be placed in a family tomb, and then open the conversation with an open-ended question. What do you particularly notice as you look at it? What does it bring to mind? And the interns would usually speak of the embrace, the closeness of the couple, the naturalism with which this unidealized pair is shown. They seem very ordinary. People often noticed, the feet sticking out below the blanket. Sometimes I would point out that many works over the centuries were made in connection with death, as communities and cultures have grappled with that mystery and that separation. I might mention that the Etruscans, like the Egyptians, created very elaborate tombs and prepared them as a way of providing for the afterlife. And fairly soon, either one of the interns or one of us or our doctor partner would mention that death was something that was very much a part of their lives at the hospital. And at that point, we would say, why don't we move over here and sit down with our stools and talk about that? I was totally on board with this plan, and I was very interested in having that conversation. So I was very surprised the first time when we started to move over to sit down, and I had this instant gut reaction that I thought, but this is wrong. And that is because the deepest principle of art museum education, for me and for most of my colleagues, was that you do not leave the object. That you are there to connect people more deeply with an original work of art. At one time, we even wrote that out, that we made that our mission statement in the education department. Our mission is to engage visitors of all ages and backgrounds in direct and meaningful encounters with original works of art. Now, the focus of a particular encounter could be on technique or formal composition or social history or storytelling, and the group could be school kids or senior citizens or art students. The earlier discussions in this workshop, earlier in the evening, the meaning that emerged might be related to the artist's intent. It might have nothing to do with it, but it was a meaning that the group had created as they looked. And those were exactly the kind of direct and meaningful encounters that we had in mind. You were engaged in a conversation with the object, And our job as educators was to facilitate your continual sort of return to the object, to see what more it might have to tell you as you looked. But in this conversation, in this particular moment, we needed to shift the balance, to move back toward the world of the hospital. The memory of my reaction at that moment is one reason I chose this sermon topic, to remind us all of the value of expanding our thinking, even in relation to our most deeply held beliefs and practices, to approach something very important to us from a new direction. So we sat down to talk about what happened at the hospital. And I found that the sarcophagus remained with us as a touchstone. Some stories moved far from it, some were very close. The interns talked about this couple choosing to be together for eternity, and of the closeness of the spouses and the families that they talked with. One evening we walked in and looked, we barely got to the sarcophagus, and a young woman instantly said, "I saw that last week with one of my patients. His wife got into bed with him because they had just changed the do not resuscitate order, and they'd done it because of something I had put him through." And she didn't mean that she'd made a mistake or carried out a procedure badly or made a wrong decision. Families often didn't realize what it meant if they asked doctors to use every possible means to resuscitate someone. And this couple had come to that realization. The interns talked about helping families make those difficult decisions. I always remember one of them saying, at the beginning of my internship, he's a 26-year-old guy, and he said, at the beginning of my internship, I felt presumptuous when I found myself in those conversations about death. I thought, who am I to be here, with this intimate issue? And now I think it's one of the most important things I can do as a doctor, because I have knowledge that they don't have. We talked about the fact that the ancient Etruscans did not have the options we have, but for that reason, they didn't have the stress of those decisions. Sometimes it seemed to me that one of them had found a space to say something that they'd been carrying around for a long time. One doctor told us about a woman who had decided against any further intervention and who was therefore going to be gone within a few hours. And it was a decision that this young doctor totally supported, but she told us how hard it was to sit and watch the dials and just watch them moving toward the end. That she hadn't anticipated how strongly she would feel. I found those conversations particularly meaningful because they were cross-generational. I was in my late 50s when these happened. I was entering that period when hospitals become part of our lives, even for fortunate, healthy families. We're there with our parents and our older relatives. We hear about our parents' friends and our friends' parents. My father died of prostate cancer when I was 41 and he was 73. And in the 1990s, studies were showing us how hard it was sometimes to defeat the training of physicians to keep fighting. That you had to be on the alert to make sure that a do not resuscitate order was observed. And we were all so grateful in 1993 to my father's primary care physician for the gentle clarity with which he encouraged my father and all of us not to automatically accept the next available treatment that the oncologist offered, to consider his quality of life. That doctor gave us all 6 good months. It meant a great deal to me to have a chance to share that story in some of these conversations, not because these young doctors needed my coaching, because I had a sense that their training was changing, but I was able to let them know how much it mattered to a family even 10 years later. I titled this sermon, "The Uses of Art," to acknowledge the many ways the arts can serve us. I loved guiding visitors in analyzing formal composition. I loved talking about artists and the choices they'd made and what they wanted to express and the skill with which they had executed it. But these workshops that used works of art as a springboard were some of my most memorable experiences of my time at the MFA. That dim gallery in the distant corner and that ancient couple gave those interns a space to say things that there wasn't time for in the corridors at Brigham and Women's, and to feel human beings caring for each other in what had been carved in a block of stone. Thank you, and we will now, will you rise as you are able and join me in our closing hymn 344, A Promise Through the Ages Rings, which has a lot of winter and spring imagery, but it seemed to me also to speak to us in midsummer. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. May we go forth and find beauty in the world, whether it is beauty created by artists and writers and composers who have come before us over the centuries or who are with us now, or beauty inherent in the nature that surrounds us. And may it open us to new ways of seeing and thinking.